All right, good evening. I'm going to call to order this meeting. Before I begin, we do have 6 out of 7 of us in the council chambers, and we have a 7th, Councillor Jansen, who's online. Councillor Jansen, can you just let us know that you can hear us and that we can hear you?
Hello, coming to you from Canyonville, Oregon.
Excellent, thank you. So I will call to order this regular council meeting for Monday, July 11th at 6:33 p.m. I would like to acknowledge with respect that we are meeting on the traditional territories of the Lekwung and speaking peoples, and we are honored to have the opportunity to build strong working relationships with the peoples of the Songhees and Esquimalt nations. Council, before we begin this evening, we need to do one change on the agenda. So I will look for a mover and seconder, and the only change is that 8.3, bylaw number 1947, is being removed. So with that change, could I get a mover and seconder this evening for the agenda? Moved by Councillor Baxter, seconded by Councillor Parkinson. Discussion? And I'm sorry, this will also be for the near-term and long-term agenda. Not seeing any discussion, I'll call the question. Those in opposition? Nobody opposes. There is no, there's nothing to release this evening, just confirming with staff. Okay, great, thank you. Mayor's message. We're getting very close to the summer. Theoretically, this is summer, so it's kind of nice. And sadly, I have to report that we are losing our deputy finance minister, or finance director, minister, not minister. Ms. Bovin is moving on at the end of next week. I just wanted to express on behalf of council, thank you so much for the work that you've done with the city. It is so appreciated. You've added incredible value to not only the work you've done, but a real service to our community. So thank you so much. I wish you and your husband all the best in Parksville. It's not as nice as Colwood, but you'll do all right there. Looking for the adoption or receipt of minutes for the regular council meeting for June 27th. Okay, moved by Councillor Baxter, second by Councillor Parkinson. Discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in opposition? Nobody opposes. Public participation this evening. Members of the public will be provided an opportunity to present concerns or ask questions. You do have 2 minutes as a speaker. There were 2 written submissions we received regarding Olympic View, 10 written submissions regarding the rezoning application for 2353 and 2361 Suk Road were received prior to the publication of the agenda, and 2 were received after the agenda publication. They have been amended to the agenda, and we have several people just online this evening available to speak to specific items. Saying that, I will go to the public and see if anyone wishes to speak. I don't believe I have anybody in chamber, so I will go online.
So we have 3 different groups of people here to speak. I'm not sure which one is going to speak. So if you raise your virtual hand, we'll put you into the queue and go to each person individually.
Okay, if there isn't anybody online wishing to speak, we'll give you one more opportunity to either raise your hand or to even just unmute and just say, I'd like to speak, and we can let you. So I'm just gonna give you 10 more seconds in case anybody's having a hard time finding their mute button. Okay, I'm going to keep going then. So we're going to move to 7.1. This is a development variance permit for 681 Allendale Road. This is a recommendation from the July 5th Committee of the Whole meeting. May I get a mover and seconder, please? Moved by Councillor Baxter, seconded by Councillor Logan. Discussion? Seeing none, I will call the question. Those in opposition? Councillor Day opposes. Councillor Kobayashi, can you keep an eye on too if Councillor Jansen ever raises his hand? 7.2, this is Mr. Borhill, our Director of Community Planning, regarding the draft active transportation network plan. Mr. Borhill.
Thank you, Worship. That was quick. It is my honor and pleasure to present to Council the City of Colwood Draft Active Transportation Plan. City staff and a consulting team from Urban Systems, led by Transportation Planner Dan Casey, have worked with stakeholder groups and interested members of the public over the last 8 months to compile this draft document. We now propose that we ask them for comments on the draft plan. Therefore, staff recommend that Council endorse the draft active transportation network plan for the purposes of seeking public and stakeholder comment. Joining me this evening is Mr. Casey. We're making a brief presentation on the project and the draft plan. With that, Your Worship, I ask that Mr. Casey be given the floor. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ian. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me tonight. As Ian mentioned, I've got a short overview I wanted to provide of the draft active transportation network plan. We are at the point where we have a full draft document, and we are hoping we can, with your blessing, take it out to the community for review and feedback. So why an active transportation network plan? I think this is, and we'll go next slide if we could, please. This is a recap on some of the information.
Amanda, can you go next slide, please?
Oh, I do. Oh, gosh. Oh, that's so much easier. Thanks. So why an active transportation network plan? We wanted to undertake this process to engage with the community and with council to pull forward some of the background information from previous planning initiatives, seek out and test current priorities and develop a new and refreshed network plan. It's to reflect some of the more recent best practices with active transportation facility design that have come along in the last 5 or 8 years, and some of your past initiatives were undertaken. Very specifically on cycling infrastructure, there's been a lot of change in industry best practice since that time. So we wanted to roll that in as part of this process. Wanted to go through a process of understanding where to focus improvements. So identify a suite of priority projects, which we've got to show in the draft document that's in your agenda package. And then lastly, this is also viewed as initial stages in pre-planning for a more comprehensive transportation master plan update. So these might be the active transportation components to that process and document. Our timeline, this work got going in late 2021. We worked through kind of a background project setup and technical review through late 2021. Undertook engagement through January and February of this year. We've been working through the spring up until really last month on this draft AT&P document. We're here today, and then we're hoping to move forward to engage with your community and come back in the fall to finalize this document. In terms of the document structure, you do have the document in your package. I thought I would just go through just very quickly some of the key sections of the material within it. And so there's purpose and content, just so it's very clear what the AT&P is and what it isn't. There's a community profile touching on population demographics, as well as the community key destinations and land uses, and then transportation and travel behavior. There's a section on what we call what we heard. So we engaged with the community and wanted to make clear what was done, what the level of participation in those events were, and then how the input and feedback that was received through those activities has helped shape what's made its way into the plan. From there, there's a framework, and I'll touch on some of this. There's vision, objectives, and targets. There's long-term networks, so both for walking and rolling in the sidewalk network, as well as a cycling network. There's fairly comprehensive design guidelines that describe what each of the network layers should look like, how they should be designed, key dimensions, that sort of thing. And then finally, there's an implementation strategy that lays out funding opportunities and priorities for investment in active transportation infrastructure. So maybe I won't go word for word here, but the document includes this framework, which helps sort of set the direction overall. There's a vision statement. It's on the screen in front of us. The vision statement is intended to articulate what the active transportation experience is and what the physical infrastructure looks like and how it functions upon successful implementation of the plan, recognizing it's a long-term endeavor. And so that's the vision statement on the screen in front of us. I won't go word for word here. And then there's 7 key objectives. And so these are short form on each of them, the objectives, but they go 1 through 7. They're around community connections. They're around regional connections. It's around all ages and abilities facilities. So that's a term that came up quite a bit through this process, all ages and abilities. It's around multimodal transportation, so active transportation, but also how it connects in with things like public transit and vehicular traffic. Number 5 is around community objectives, so not just sort of the focused objectives of this document, but how the work investing in active transportation infrastructure can actually help achieve much broader community objectives than simply how we move around. 6 is around prioritization and looking at some of the key corridors and where those opportunities for improvements might be. And then lastly, it's around implementation, so investment in infrastructure. So I talked briefly about long-term network plans. The plan that's on the screen in front of us is our sidewalk network. So it identifies the location of existing sidewalks. Those are shown in the purple. Locations with a one-sided sidewalk, locations with sidewalks on both sides. There's also pathways and walkways identified on the network plan as well. And then importantly, where we see the purple lines, the existing sidewalks in place, there's another layer on here called the priority pedestrian network, and that's shown in the thicker blue lines. And really what that's meant to guide is when we overlay that with the location of existing sidewalks, this priority network shows us where sidewalks currently aren't, and we want to see them. So they're really where the focus of the build out of sidewalks into the future are meant to be. Design guidance around pedestrian facilities. There's actually some very good guidance already in some of your planning documents. Your OCP does a very nice job of setting some of the kind of key parameters on this front. And so it talks about minimum sidewalk widths of 2 meters. Importantly, that width allows for 2 people in a wheelchair or 2 people pushing strollers to pass one another. And so that achieves all of our universal design objectives. And then it also talks about going wider than 2 meters in higher areas of higher pedestrian traffic. So maybe key commercial nodes, maybe near bus stops, maybe on major roads around schools, these sorts of things. Some of the other key guidance is around universal design. So making sure that any investments in pedestrian infrastructure are done in a way that all people in the community can use. Big focus on things like curb ramps at the block ends or at crosswalks and suitable grades. So we don't see any facilities that are too steep for certain people to navigate. And then a couple others around minimizing driveway crossings. So we keep a consistent and flat pedestrian facility, and also others around the desire for boulevard or physical separation between where you walk and where vehicles travel. And then similarly for the cycling network. And so the map on the screen in front of us is showing the 4 different types of cycling facilities. I'll describe each on the next slide, but it's protected bike lanes, painted bike lanes, multi-use pathways, and neighborhood bikeways. So 4 different facility types that make up the network. And on the map is shown is solid line is where facilities currently exist. Dashed lines are where facilities are proposed in future. And similar to the sidewalk network we looked at a second ago, the thicker orange lines are indicating priority corridors. And so when we think about a cycling network that's built out over time, the priority corridors are meant to be those that are pursued first, and working toward a connected network that connects to things like schools, recreation, commercial areas and jobs, and then importantly to facilities like the Galloping Goose to facilitate regional travel, as well as to some of the connecting facilities in neighboring municipalities. And so that's kind of the premise behind this priority network.
Staff, we seem to have somebody either waiting to come in, so could we delete them or, thank you.
Excellent. Okay. And then some of the guidance behind each of these facility types. So I talked about it: protected, painted, multi-use, and then neighborhood bikeway. I think we have a good handle on what a multi-use pathway looks like. We have good precedent for painted bike lanes. With painted bike lanes, and what's shown in the photo on the slide is a buffered painted bike lane, provides added lateral clearance between where the cyclist travels and where motorists travel, added comfort for the cyclist. But then importantly here, we're proposing the addition of protected bike lanes. So this is not something that was in the transportation master plan, and it is a best practice on streets with either high vehicle speeds and or large amounts of traffic. And so you notice on the network plan, the proposal is for protected bike lanes on some of the more major streets. And then lastly, and kind of a key component to an overall network of these neighborhood bikeways, and so they weave together continuous cycling routes on low speed and low volume, typically residential roads. So they're, as long as they're displaying the appropriate characteristics, they are quite comfortable for a cyclist to share the space with a vehicle. And so wanted to just pick up on 4 key items, what we wanted to call big moves. And we thought these were important to touch on because there's a lot of information on both of those network plans, as well as the supporting material in the draft plan. And so we wanted to pull out a few kind of key themes here that we thought would be worth highlighting for the group. So number 1 is around the Galloping Goose. And so the ATMP gives a fair bit of emphasis to the planned grade separated crossing of Souk Road, Old Island Highway. And so we feel this is important, and it's something that's been brought forward as part of this document. Also is sort of advocating for, so recognizing the trail is in a provincial right of way and it is managed and operated regionally, but expressing the city's preference to see asphalt surface for the portions of the Goose in the city over time. And so that more being an advocacy and coordination action, we'll say, as opposed to something the city has jurisdiction over. Number 2 is around complete streets. And so a number of the major corridors within the city have been identified as priority improvements, that being both improvements for cyclists as well as improvements for pedestrians. And so we'll notice streets like Machosen, Kelly, and Souk Road, some of which we've already had initial discussions on and planning discussions on in past. 3 is around elevated design. And so touched on a little bit of this already, but really we wanted through this document to provide that added design guidance to make sure that it's not, as we invest money in the infrastructure, as new development comes on board and they're being asked to build some of this infrastructure also, we make sure that we're getting high quality, safe, comfortable, and accessible infrastructure as an outcome of that. And so 2 key areas being universal design and accessibility. The other one being introduction of protected cycling facilities, both of which are included in the document. Then lastly, some of the priority investments that are identified in the implementation strategy in the back of the document. And so some of those key investments were around the Galloping Goose, Machosen Road, Kelly Road, and Milburn Drive as some of the highlights, and there are more. So next steps, we are seeking council support to move forward and engage with the community on the draft plan. Assuming that is supported, we would go out to the community and seek feedback. And then lastly, hopefully through the fall, we'd be working to incorporate that feedback and finalize the ATMP. So with that, I'll conclude and be available for any questions.
Great, thank you. I will go to council, Councillor Baxter.
Two in the document, it's actually on page 15 of the document. That's a heat map of cycling concerns. And one of the darkest red areas, which is a high concern, appears to be in Herman Williams Park. And I don't get that.
Good point. That reflects input that we received. And so I'm going off memory. I think we received about 100 distinct entries into that mapping input option. So that would reflect the input that we received.
Or could it have been misplaced on the map? Because if you look at the pedestrian concerns, they're centered on the intersections of AD, Machosen, and Kelly, whereas on the bike map, they're actually in the middle of the park.
Mr. Mayor, to add to Mr. Casey's response to Councillor Baxter's question, I do believe from previous conversation with the consulting team that these areas, this area of concern was relating to 80 Road and the connection with Machosen. The fact that it is slightly shifted towards the park may in fact be a technical issue, but I do recall having the same question and us feeling that the concerns were situated around that same area of pedestrian concern.
That would make sense, because it bothers me every time I go through that junction. Thank you. You mentioned 2.5 meter clear width for sidewalks in commercial areas, and commercial areas often have a clutter zone in the sidewalk, you know, where there's the signs and the benches and everything. So the 2.5 would be measured sort of from the shop front to the beginning of the clutter.
Yes, it would be to remain clear. And
Yes.
so if clutter is part of the, say, the intended program, the anticipated programming of those land uses, we'd want to see extra space to accommodate those activities.
Yeah, so we'd have maybe a 3 or 3.5 width of concrete. 2.5 would be clear. Great, thank you. And there's a mention of bike parking in here. And probably nothing to do with you, but something I want to draw staff's attention to. There was no bike parking at Meadow Park, which was only recently completed. And given how much attention we pay to bike parking for businesses, and it baffles me that we don't have any bike parking at Meadow Park. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm actually going to go to Councillor Parkinson next because I accidentally had deleted you off. So you're up.
Thank you. A lot of stuff in this report, very, very thorough, complete report. Probably you could take most of it and sell it as a textbook on this kind of stuff, because it seemed to me there was a lot of material in there that was well covered. So so congrats on that. But I must admit, I do have a few concerns. And I'm going to throw them at you sort of randomly, and I'm going to bore the heck out of my council colleagues as I get down to some stupid stuff. But firstly, in the report, when we talk about pulling from the OCP on multi-use pathways, working with partners at Royal Road site to provide an attractive and direct north-south connection on Wishart. I happen to think that's incredibly important. I see it made the sort of important routes in both the sidewalk and cycling maps, but didn't make it into the implementation on any sort of order. Now, and I understand there's humongous hurdles to overcome to create such a thing. But here's what bothers me is if I'm a cyclist at the corner of Wishart and Machosen, and there's a great route down Wishart through Royal Roads to get to Galloping Goose, I'm happy as a clam. If there isn't, well, then I'm probably going to go up Machosen to Souk and down Souk. And if a lot of people are going to go up Machosen and down Souk, well, then we certainly should be putting in the infrastructure to accommodate that at some considerable cost. So some of these issues, if we're not careful, we could spin out into a whole bunch of costs that might be better spent in other ways. So I really think we need to understand that. And and decide what we're going to do before we get to the implementation, which I understand in so many cases is a long ways down the road. Similar concerns for cyclists who may gather at Veterans and Souk. A lot of choices for them that when they're at that location, and probably a fair number of people will get to that location, of how they might get to the Galloping Goose, which I must confess, I sort of, when I look at these things, I sort of think of the commuter cyclist in hopes of trying to get some cars off the road. So that's kind of, I understand that this is for a whole bunch of things besides just commuter cyclists, but every commuter cyclist we get probably is one less car at rush hour, and that is only going to become more and more important. If I could just have my colleagues indulge me as I go through and sort of get my chicken scratch notes that I made on here, throw out a few other comments. And they're random, so it'll take me a little while. And I do apologize. I guess there aren't that many. No, I passed one. Hang on. Regional connections. Again, we seem to be talking about, I've buggered it up just to see if I can pardon my English, Your Worship. That's not parliamentary language. True, but not parliamentary. Okay, now I can change that. I can change. No, I can't. Anyway, oh, there we go. All ages and facilities, protected cycling facilities have been constructed on at least 3 major routes. A nice global thing to say. It goes on further to say investment and implementation. At least $1.5 million is spent each year on active transportation network improvements. I suspect all of council would love to have that ability to do that, but there are a number of other things. I'm not sure that this council's discussed that. Another one, concrete sidewalks on at least one side of the street for all local streets. Again, the staggering cost associated with implementing that, whatever time frame you want to look at, and nice to have, but I'm not so sure that there aren't higher priorities for the city. Origin and destination. You talked in there. There was a paragraph of sort of talking about origin and destination being important, and to me, it's kind of everything. And if I had to say something that I felt was lacking in this report, as I said, you had fantastic stuff on the active transportation and design and options, but exactly in Colwood, where are we trying to get people from and to, and what are the best routes to do that? And I felt that the report would have been strengthened if there had been more sort of analysis of that. And again, it's because, to me, to some extent, it appears like we look at each road individually and say, what would be nice to have on this road? And that, of course, leads to bike lanes and sidewalks and all this kind of stuff. But I suspect councils in the future are going to have to rationalize between what would be really nice to have and just how much money they have to do each of these things. So we really have to be very careful about what we're trying to achieve here and where people are going to want to go and make, maybe we have to sort of, maybe some people would like to go in some roads and we go, well, there's not enough people to justify the investment on that one. So let's spend a little bit more on other roads and coerce them into better routes that are more appropriate routes. So that's I had concerns on that. And I'm gonna hush up here in a second, everybody. I know you'll be happy to hear that. But when we look at the project list, priority 1 projects, priority 2 projects, and what we have there is we have the list of the project, the original costs, and the new estimates, and some staggering changes. Millburn Drive, if I take the second one, Millburn Drive was estimated at 1.2, now it's 2.88 million. Kelly Road went from 1.5 to 3.3. Lagoon Road went from 500,000 to 5.4, on and on like that. And that's not, gee, the price of concrete went up or the price of asphalt went up. That's somebody, whoever did the original cost and whoever did the new cost have different scopes of work in there. And I think to publish this and put it out with that sort of discrepancy without an explanation, it's just going to bring a bunch of questions and concerns. Because obviously that whatever cost 500,000 last year doesn't cost 6 million this year. It may probably cost more, and we all get that. But I think that this table would be enhanced if we sort of had a here's what's changed to create this, especially for the ones that are significant. We're going from 7 million to 25.5 on one of these tables. I mean, we're talking real numbers here, and there's going to be concern throughout the community. And I think we should at least be armed with the here's what caused that. So I don't mean to sound negative. As I said, there's an awful lot of stuff here, but I do see the importance of this and the implications of not being careful of what we're committing and saying we're doing, and leading to perhaps spending in future years that the council can't afford. So thank you, Your Worship.
Councillor Parkinson did have a question in there, and I will look to staff to see if they can answer it. Where was the escalation of costs? Why did it escalate so significantly? Oh, sorry, Mike. No, you double tapped it. There you go.
Does this work now? Thanks for the question. Yes, so when the active transportation 2022 projects were scoped and direction was given from council, we went back and recalculated a cost per linear meter based on that sort of level of scope for the 2022 projects, and then compared those costs per linear meter to these phases and these projects. It is just a very high level cost estimate, but it's based on the 2022 scope and scale. And then more specifically, looked further into exactly what phases and the description of the active transportation network projects, what was incorporated in those, and then used an adjustment factor to give them.
Thank you. Councillor Logan.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I would just want to acknowledge the amount of work that went into this plan, Dan, and I'm really encouraged. I wish we had done this about 20 years ago, because I think we'd be in a far different place. And I recognize that this plan doesn't mean we're going to make these improvements tomorrow or even next year, but it's a plan over time that will help guide the city as we work with our development partners to realize certain improvements. But I also hope that it will also spur some creativity on the city's part to possibly invest in other infrastructure that may drive these improvements that we're hoping for. And Kelly Road is a natural example for me. If we invest a little money on Kelly Road into sewers, as an example, it will spur some investment in the properties and bring us the desired improvements, as a bit of a spinoff. A couple of questions though for you, Dan. You'd mentioned the protected bike lanes, so I appreciate the incorporation of protected bike lanes in there. And I think you probably heard some of the feedback anecdotally from residents already on that. So I appreciate that. And you had mentioned that routes were chosen that were high volume, high traffic areas. Does the plan kind of look at linkages between community centers or nodes like shopping areas and schools that may not be on high traffic areas, but have a more vulnerable population that would use a protected bike lane, like kids, as an example? Is that?
Really great question and line of thinking. So yes, some of those neighborhood bikeways that I'd mentioned, and I know you're advancing work on AD Road and the northern end of Machosen Road right now as an example. There's a series of those facilities that have been identified. And in my view, there's actually great potential in those, both in the experience, if they're done properly, they're great places to ride, as well as the cost differential, where you find a good one that's continuous, you can build it out for just a fraction of the cost of what some of this more heavier infrastructure might be. And so there's that. And then there's also pathways that have been identified where, again, typically either roadside or off a street altogether. And so would be very comfortable places to ride and walk.
The second question was regarding sidewalks, and I'm not sure that this is the right report for that, but when we're talking about design, I'm thinking about, would this report make recommendations on specific finishes or interest? And so my comment is born out of a recent interest that council has had to make intersections more interesting, utilizing sidewalk finishes, designs, that sort of jazz. And so would this report kind of facilitate that, make recommendations, or is that something over and above kind of the design that this report would envision?
Yeah, so I'd say no, not at all. It absolutely could. I think it does to a degree. With respect to sidewalks, it talks actually fairly specifically about a preference for brushed concrete, typical kind of sidewalk finish. And we received some input earlier on that actual pavers or even stamped asphalt, it can be problematic over time as things shift and warp and present a bit of an accessibility potentially concern. And so we've actually got a little bit of guidance in the document that says we'd prefer to stay away from those treatments where possible. So I think, but that said, I would say there's still an openness and willingness to incorporate or at least give consideration to other treatments if there's a desire.
Right. Thank you, Your Worship. I'm prepared to move the motion when it's appropriate, but I'm happy to send it to the public. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Logan. I'll come back to you when after everybody's had an opportunity to ask questions. Councillor Kobayashi.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. Just two questions, actually. I think both of our staff. Mayor, just you talked about the cost escalation. I think you said the primary reason was scope creep. And so I'm just wondering, educate me right now. Who makes that approval for scope creep? When you have scope creep and the costs escalate, who makes that decision? That's okay, and that's the new number. That's question number one.
Your Worship, may I?
Please.
Thank you. Administration has used council's recent adjudication of sidewalks where you have made determinations about which approach to move forward with.
Okay.
To determine the scope of projects that are now contained in here. And so the inclusion of lighting and stormwater infrastructure and curbs, we again use previous council decision-making, very recent decision-making to guide scope.
Okay, thanks very much. So it's us. Thank you. What a nice way of putting it. The second question I have is just public engagement and how we engage the public right now. And I believe the report says our primary methodology is let's talk Colwood, I believe. And so I guess my question is that far reaching enough right now? I know there's people my age and higher that don't even have a computer. When I talk about let's talk Colwood, they go, huh? And so is this the best way to reach out to the public? How did we do it before we had Let's Talk Colwood? So just a question I have. Thank you.
Your Worship, to Councillor Kobayashi's question. So this project was one that was really born out of the dark days of the Omicron wave. We had to design a public engagement process that was doable with the second set of restraints that came online. So we prioritized online engagement. We had an online session that was open to the general public and promoted through all of our online networks. We only had 2 people RSVP. We decided to shift resources to a focused session with our scenic our local scenic group, which we felt quite successful. In this next phase of engagement, we're acknowledging the greater capacity for us to reach out into the public, and we'll be setting up at community events through the summer. We'll have a table and information and be actively seeking input from people attending events. And I'm also working with our communication team to look at other ways to expand in-person engagement along with the Let's Talk Colwood portal through the summer. And we do hope to extend the engagement period through the first week of September for those individuals who may be away during the summer months.
So just further on to, so how do you measure success? What's successful when it comes to public engagement? And this goes for everything that we seem to do here, but I've always been curious about that, how we measure if it's successful. Is it, do you measure by the number of people that engage, or how do we do that? I noticed that in some things that we do say that, but so what is successful? Reaching 500 people, 600 people? So.
Certainly, I'm happy for our communications manager to correct me, but with every project, at the outset of the project, we are asking ourselves those questions. For this project, we were looking at specific groups, user groups that we wanted to engage with and get feedback from. As I said, there were challenges, and I can't say that we heard from all of the groups that we did identify at that beginning stages of the project. There are a couple groups that we specifically hope to target through this next phase. But to answer your question, I think we at the outset wanted to hear from certain perspectives within the community, and to make sure that we had that wholesome package of feedback that represented different user groups.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a great document to start. So thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Day.
Thank you. And thanks to all the other members who've asked such good questions. I just have a couple of points. I was thinking that this is a lot of information and maybe somewhat, I'm sure, challenging to put it all together, but also challenging to present to the public as well. There's a couple of areas that I'm not sure if they are not on here because they're not happening yet, or if they simply got forgotten. One is the trail through Havenwood Park that goes to Desmond Drive. That is both bicycle and pedestrian friendly, other than it being rather a steep grade. If you're going to Desmond Drive with a bike, you may have to walk it. But that didn't appear obvious on my map looking at it, and I perhaps have it wrong, but it looks like it goes up to Glassview Lane, which there is a connection there, but the one to Desmond Drive is possibly the best connection if you were trying to go up to Triangle Mountain and wanted a more natural path where cars weren't going to be your problem. And the other is a potential development site. Nothing proposed, I believe, at the moment, but previously it had been on the maps. It's at the end of Bunker Road. And it was always my understanding that there was going to be a pedestrian connection through that property if and when it were to develop. It's greater than 3 acres, so high likelihood that it may develop. And that pedestrian link would provide an important link for pedestrians to not have to walk the busiest roads. So those are just two things that I could add off the top of my head after quite a few years doing this type of work here. And I think that I'm sure that this plan will be refined by the public, but like all things, it's going to be very hard to get their attention and get them to stop their busy lives long enough to be able to give us that very valuable input. So I do hope that we will be continuing to engage in this plan and updating it probably for many years to come. So thank you.
Thank you. Just before I look to Councillor Logan for a motion, I just have a couple questions myself. Staff, presently, I'm not sure who to ask, but presently, is our sidewalk width mandatory like a 1.5? Is it 1.8? What would be the requirement for a sidewalk presently? And so while you're thinking about that, the reason I asked the question is if the plan, for example, just using an example of, let's talk about Royal Bay. If Royal Bay has a plan right now and it's 1.8, for example, and this plan ends up passing after the public, does that change that development, that development would now be required to have a 2.0?
Thank you, Your Worship. To answer that question, I do believe it's 1.8 currently.
I'm sorry?
1.8
Okay.
for the sidewalk. With regards to the Royal Bay question, that's what we're currently working through. They already have approved cross sections through previous work. That being said, what we are doing right now, we're making those engagements, suggesting that we might want to review some of those requirements, see if we can adjust some of the pieces we're using, for instance, shrinking boulevards to try to get to where we're going to go when this is done. Staff is in the midst of doing the subdivision servicing bylaw, which is the bylaw which will regulate these widths moving forward. And in that bylaw, we are waiting till this process is completed so that we can adopt those measures and put those in those bylaws. So at that time, we'll change those, and Royal Bay cross sections are within that bylaw. That would be their time to come back to council during that process and say, we've changed those cross sections, and then ask you to vary those requirements. So you'll see that and have a chance to discuss that, and they'll have a chance to defend that choice.
Okay, thank you. Stay there. My next question is in regards to costs. With a 1.8 meter sidewalk, there's a certain cost to that, and clearly the cost increased to 2.0. Was that ever calculated in when the discussions were discussed about expanding sidewalks? And I'm not sure if that's you or if through the planning department, or
I would guess.
how would we understand the financial
The
ramifications?
1.8 to 2 meters is, from a cost consideration, pretty insignificant from a benefit process. I don't know if they considered that or not, but my suggestion would be that the difference in the use and enjoyment of the facility would by far outweigh the cost difference, because it really would just be the cost of the concrete. The form works the same, the finishing time would be about the same, everything else would be about the same. So the cost of the concrete in that whole process is less than half of the price. And then from there, it's, whatever that factor of 0.2 on 10%. So it would be a pretty small, maybe a 4 or 5% increase in the overall cost per linear meter to go to 0.2. It wouldn't be much at all.
Awesome, thank you. My final question is in regards to paving or building sidewalks versus the environmental impacts that those sidewalks would have from a greenhouse gas and so on. Did the report take that into account at all? And how do I guess the reason I'm asking the question is, how many people do I need to be on that sidewalk to offset the environmental costs to build that sidewalk?
That's a really good and big question. I'm afraid that analysis was not done on this. It's something that could be looked into, but it wasn't done here directly. No.
Okay.
Yeah.
I see somebody sneaking behind you.
Thank you, Worship. So it is a really good question, not just for the purposes of understanding our environmental performance, but for grant applications. So when we apply for federal and provincial funding for sidewalk and bike lanes, we have to put forward what our proposed reductions in greenhouse gas emissions are. So we're looking at developing a methodology to apply in a consistent manner through our low carbon resiliency plan. So that's one of the deliverables we're trying to develop at this moment. In the past, we've tried to determine the number of trips that would be shifted from a vehicle to walking or cycling. And we've relied on statistics developed by let's say, provincial and national bodies, and then applied to the numbers that we have from CRD trip counts and other local data. So as I said, we're going to try to make that a little bit more consistent through the low carbon zero Z plan.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Logan?
I'll move to that.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Baxter. Discussion? Seeing none, I will call the question. Those in opposition? Councillor Parkinson opposes. Moving on to 7.3. This is Ms. Bovin, our Manager of Finance, and Mr. Andrews, our Engineering Lead, regarding the 2022-2023 active transportation projects, additional information and debt servicing cost estimates. Mr. Andrews.
Thank you, Your Worship. As per the staff report, staff are recommending that council rescind incorrect wording from the June 13th, 2022 resolution about the gas tax funding versus long-term borrowing for the 2022 active transportation projects. There was a slight wording discrepancy previously. Owens and Benhomer can be funded through gas tax in 2022. And then the remaining projects, Hagel, Adai, and 80, pardon me, and Kelly can be long-term funded, funded in the 2023 gas tax. And then furthermore, we're also asking for direction on how to proceed with either option A or option B with the lighting designs for the 2022 active transportation projects. Those are outlined in the report. Either option A is a David arm design where David arms would be attached to the existing BC Hydro poles. And option B is a higher level of service with city-owned lighting and more lighting. Once those options, once direction is given, I can pass it over to Manager of Finance to discuss the debt servicing associated with that choice. I'm here to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Councillor Baxter.
So with the David arm lighting, we can only put lights up where there are power poles, which isn't always exactly where you need the lights. And the lights are constrained by what BC Hydro is willing to put up. And you get one level of lighting and that's that. Do you or does anybody else in the organization know if we've ever had any public feedback on whether the public wants to see lighting of the sort of higher level, or whether they're happy with the BC Hydro type level?
Please.
As far as I know, we've never asked that question. We have had feedback in certain areas where there is no lighting, for example, along BMP, a lot of feedback about that. As to the level or type of lighting or location of lighting, other than that, I'm not aware of any data we've gathered.
Well, if we go for option A, we'll probably get some.
Just a sort of point to that is I have received a few calls from people on the roads. Every opinions differ, but there have been a couple comments that were concerned about a higher level of lighting on the roads. But a couple of individuals doesn't necessarily reflect the whole, but that's what I've heard personally.
No, but we've actually seen that where, yeah, people are very concerned about more lighting in front of their homes. Some want more. So I'm ready to move option A whenever it's appropriate.
Okay, thank you. I will, I'll go to Councillor Day and then I'll come back to you for your motion. Councillor Baxter. Councillor Day.
Thank you. So I feel like maybe we're kind of in an area that we didn't start out to go to. We started out talking about sidewalks. We wanted to make sure that as we're improving the neighborhoods, we didn't skimp on the necessary infrastructure. So storm drains and curb and gutter were also required. And then lighting came into the conversation. And just to the question that was just asked. I certainly have been here for some very strong conversations about lighting, specifically people who wanted more lighting on the road, but weren't happy with the davit arm lighting once it was shining in their bedroom window. And we've certainly, this council has had that discussion when we've had a new lot develop in an older neighborhood where there was discussion about lighting. So lighting, yes, generally speaking, if you ask the question, do you want lights on your road? Everyone would say yes. But when you put the light up and it shines somewhere that doesn't work, that will definitely come back to bite us. So unless we are prepared to share a design with the people on the road, I don't see how we can get that feedback at this stage of the game as you want to continue. Since we're talking about davit arm lighting, and since if there's a problem with the davit arm lighting, we could easily not put a light up. Is it possible that we could move ahead with the project but not address lighting on these roads in these existing neighborhoods until we're asked to look at putting up a davit arm? Like, is there a constructive thing that needs to happen at the same time as the sidewalk in order to put that lighting in, or is it easy enough to add it after the fact?
Thank you for your question. Yes, of course, we can do lighting later. However, if the higher level of lighting design was chosen or will eventually be chosen, there are conduits underground that connect the city-owned streetlights. So if that will, it makes sense to install those while you're doing the whole road. However, the davit arms, you're right, can be installed really anytime in the future if you'd like to, look at it then.
So I just like to suggest to the rest of council that if we're looking at doing the davit arm lighting option, that we consider deleting that from the project this year. As it could be done later, no problem. But if we were interested in the higher service level lighting, then maybe that should be a discussion that we have, how to best plan for that.
Thank you. Councillor Parkinson.
Thank you, Worship. That's a good thought, Councillor Day. I was going to support the concept of davit arm lighting, but I could probably be convinced to do it later rather than sooner. As far as your motion goes, Councillor Baxter.
Oh, sorry, there is no motion right now. I said I would come back to him.
Oh, okay. Well, before there's a motion, we should talk about the financing. I guess my thinking was that we selected these projects out of the sort of 10-year plan. I think there was 11 projects in total and we started with these. So staff has worked diligently on how to finance this over 30 years for where there's not enough money in the gas tax budget. I would prefer a 10-year payout and then to match the sort of 10-year plan rather than having stuff that just makes more sense to me to get them paid off because there will be more projects in the future. But I suspect we better hear from financially smarter people than I before we confirm that. So maybe I'll ask staff to sort of address the 10-year versus 30-year borrowing for these works.
Your Worship, through to Councillor Parkinson. Sorry, I'm just, I think I'd closed the option. I did analyze more than one option. So I do have for 5 years and 10 years as well. So with option A, so the davit arm lighting, the required borrowing is just over $5 million. As noted in the report, the annual payments for that 30-year period would be just over $347,000. Alternatively, over 10 years, the annual payments would be just under 669,000. I will preface that by saying this is using the current indicative rate for these borrowing periods. That is subject to change. As we know, recently there have been Bank of Canada interest increases, and there is likely to be in the future. So that is based on the current indicative rates. Again, those amounts will likely go up by the time the debt is actually incurred. And I'll give one further amount for the option A, the David Arm. For the 5-year borrowing, it would be annual payments of just shy of 1,157,000. Again, using the current indicative rate for that 5-year period. Did that answer your question, Councillor Parkinson? I'm happy also to give you the amounts for the option B, the higher service level lighting option.
No, that's absolutely. I think there were perhaps some concerns about the overall debt service ability. Do we have issues with that on either of these 3 options that you've given us?
Thank you. Through your worship. I did analyze all of the options with the city's current debt as well as projected potential debt that has been previously discussed with council. And all of the options are within our liability servicing limit. And in fact, the highest one, I think we got to 58% within the next 5-year period, assuming that we take on the estimated debt that we have that isn't currently part of the financial plan, as well as the debt that we're potentially talking about tonight.
Thank you. Thank you. Very, very complete information. We're going to miss you.
Thank you.
Then my preference out of that list would be the 10-year borrowing at 660,000. So when Michael makes a motion, I'll make an amendment.
Great, thank you. I'm going to stick with first time speakers, and then I'll look for a motion. Councillor Kobayashi.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. Thank you very much for those answers, Marley. On an ongoing basis, how do we service that debt? What's the plan?
Thank you, Your Worship, through to Councillor Kobayashi. I believe the intent in discussing with the Director of Finance today would be that she would be returning with a report to council, depending on the decision tonight, with respect to options for funding that debt, whether or not it's through taxation and or partially through reserves or reducing transfer to reserves. She would be bringing forward that information for you.
Okay, thank you very much. That's why I'm a little leery about Councillor Parkinson's recommendation here. Until I know that, I'm not willing to shorten that period, that's for sure. Okay, thank you very much. That's great.
I'm going to speak and then I'll go back to Councillor Parkinson and Councillor Baxter. I was not prepared to support option A today. I was planning on supporting option B, even though it's the higher of the costs. The reason being that I've seen an example, and I use the example on Seafield presently, and that's a new development that just landed. It's a small lot development. There's a sidewalk on one side, and then there's lighting on the opposite side. And so when you walk down Seafield, you go from light to shadow to light to shadow to light to shadow. And I look at it and go, this is stupid. And I go, why did we put lighting on the opposite side? We should be supporting and putting it there. And I looked at this and went, are we being penny smart and dollar dumb with going with option A? I do like what Councillor Day mentioned about not having any lighting. I know for myself on my street on Portsmouth, I would prefer not to have lighting at all. And so I do wonder about asking the question to these people that we are building the sidewalks on, are they desirous of having lighting or not? But that puts me in an awkward position because I also realize that if we choose not to do lighting presently, then that locks us into option A. Because as I've heard from you, it sounds like we would be digging up to implement option B. There would be significant costs. Okay, I'm seeing the head shake. So I will have to think about that as I listen to the motion. Councillor Baxter.
I just want to clarify something before I make a motion. As I understand it, there's no capital cost to David Arm lighting.
Thank you for the question, Councillor Baxter. That's correct if BC Hydro sees viable revenue over the life cycle of that product. So if it's a program for an entire street and they don't think there's going to be enough revenue generated, then they can ask a capital request. But generally speaking, with a David Arm, there is no capital cost.
So we pay rental. So if we delay the installation of lighting till somebody asks for it, it's not like this capital cost goes down. We just won't be paying that rent for that time, which I'm not saying makes it a bad idea. So I will move option A, but with the recommendation for a 10-year payment period, just to steal Councillor Parkinson's thunder.
Okay, do I have a seconder to that motion? Seconded by Councillor Parkinson. Discussion? I will discuss then. So clarification on option A says that we're going to do it because it's the 7.8 million. So have we then not, Councillor Day had a suggestion of us delaying this project. I'm just confirming this motion sitting on the table right now does not delay that. We move that forward, or I'm just looking for clarification on the motion. Right. On, so, oh, I see what you're saying. Okay, I got it. I now understand. Thank you. I understand the motion. Okay. I will look, is there any other discussion? It looks like we've lost Councillor Jansen. Have we lost? He's gone. Okay. All right. Oh, Councillor Kobayashi.
Yes, I just want to, I just find it very odd that until I understand how we're going to service the debt, how can we vote for this? If you don't understand it, it's going to be a significant tax burden later on. You know, we're encumbering a future council right now. So
once he's finished, yes.
So that's why I have problems with this right now. I mean, until I get that explanation from finance, I just don't, I can't support this at this point in time. Thank you.
So instead of going to Councillor Baxter, I'll look to staff first, since Councillor Kobayashi asked for staff to respond, and then I'll.
Through your worship, as our finance manager mentioned, there are a number of options to consider. The financial plan currently sees us transferring approximately $2 million into our Sustainable Infrastructure Reserve Fund. When you consider that the intention of that fund is to provide funding for an array of assets, road infrastructure represents approximately 30%. The calculations that support what we transfer into that reserve are to build up the road infrastructure, related sidewalk work, et cetera, to kind of the greatest standard that we have, that we may not currently have. When we have these discussions about introducing debt financing, one option could be that rather than transferring an approximate $600,000 that we currently have funded in the financial plan into a reserve, that reserve transfer decrease so that we can support the debt servicing obligations for doing this work now, utilizing debt. So in short, that would not see a property tax increase, but rather we would reallocate existing taxation dollars away from the reserve to service the debt. When the debt falls off in 10 years, we could then transfer it back. As we currently do right now, when debt servicing falls off, we increase our reserve transfer. So that is one option that may be considered. Another is currently our projections anticipate that our gas tax financing will fall off at the end of this current agreement. That being said, that could be, those grant monies could be replaced with other grant monies. If that is the case, again, we may have eligible expenditures. We could use those potential grant monies to service this debt. So there's a second option where you wouldn't see an increase in taxation. Another consideration is the discussion surrounding new construction taxation. We have policy in place that guides how we utilize that. Whether or not there could be an argument that these works would meet the current policy. Are we doing these works because of the increased usage in these areas? That could support reallocating new construction taxation in the future towards these debt servicing costs. So that is what the finance manager was speaking to, were some of the options on how we would be servicing this debt. And what you may have noticed in the Q2 financial update, we do have a pending grant application underway to support these infrastructure improvements, but that is only potential. Thank you.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry.
So what's the timing of that, that potential grant? I know we've got that, it's in the report, the grant application. What's the timing on that?
Through the mayor to Councillor Kobayashi, we have been desperately trying to find an answer to that question. Successive emails to the grant program have elicited friendly responses, but no indication of when we will receive confirmation. When we initiated the application, we expected by the end of this calendar year, and certainly much beforehand if possible. However, we have no timelines from the funder.
Okay, thanks. Thank you very much.
Councillor Baxter, did you want to speak? Councillor Baxter, then Parkinson.
So the answer to Councillor Kobayashi's question is that following whatever resolution we adopt here, staff won't be going out and borrowing the money the next day. The money will be borrowed well down the road. In fact, usually the project will be finished. And when the project's finished, then you know exactly how much you have to borrow, because there's always contingency in there. Shortly after this meeting, whether we adopt a 10-year or 30-year payback, we will get the report from finance, which gives us the implications of this debt financing. And we may at that time choose to change whatever decision we have made tonight based on those revised numbers, because it will still be months and months and months before we actually do the borrowing. So the decision we make tonight may be characterized as an interim decision as to what the period of payback is.
Councillor Parkinson?
I'm sure.
Sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. Just before Councillor Parkinson, staff had their, yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Mayor, Your Worship. I just wanted to add some further insight into Councillor Baxter's comment. We are looking for direction tonight for staff to return with the loan authorization bylaw. Councillor Baxter is correct with respect to its lengthy process, but we would start by looking to have council give first 3 readings to a loan authorization bylaw that would have a maximum amount that we would be borrowing. And then we would start the alternative approval process and all of the steps that go along with long-term debt. And by the time that process is finished, it would probably be about 7 months. And technically, you wouldn't be able to have shovels in the ground until that process is finalized. And then you have the authority to spend money, whether or not you actually borrow the full amount of what you're authorized to spend under that loan authorization bylaw.
Thank you. Councillor Parkinson.
Yeah, I was going to suggest that staff probably goes white when they hear council saying, let's make a decision, but we'll might change it later. So I see they headed that off at the pass. Well done. I'm going to support the motion. I thought I would give Councillor Day time to think about David Arms in or out. I'm right now leaning towards David Arms in and supporting the motion as written, but we should probably make a informed decision on that. If that's the way we want to go.
Staff, does that decision need to be made this evening?
Excellent question. From an engineering standpoint, I will defer to Josh for that. From a financial standpoint, when finance returns with the loan authorization bylaw, it can be the amount including the David Arm lighting. The additional amount tonight is just over 30,000, and then Josh may know exactly what's included in the original budget related to that. But again, that will not have a high level impact in what we would be proposing the amount of the loan authorization bylaw to be. So with that respect, from a financial standpoint, we could have the full amount, and then, but I will have engineering answer whether or not they can move forward with that.
So the short answer is that we could move forward with or without the lighting. If we do decide to do it afterwards, we might get away with no capital cost if BC Hydro is on board with covering the cost of installing the lighting. But we won't know that until later on. If we want to move forward now, then we need to fund it now.
Councillor Day.
Thank you. So my personal thoughts on it are that I think we'd be better off without it, the David Arm lighting, and then installing lighting based on citizen requests for David Arms, knowing that that's our option. So then we would only be installing lighting where it's been asked for, which I think would put us in an easier position in terms of engaging our public, because we're addressing the issue of sidewalks and safe routes to school, and making sure that we don't have to dig an area up twice by putting in all the infrastructure that we're going to need, and then limiting our need to undo something that we've done by not having started it. So I do know that we've had requests for additional lighting before, and where we were able to accommodate that request with a David Arm, we've been able to do so. So I think that's just all around a safer route. We're doing what we said we would do and limiting the amount of unknowns in our project.
Great, thank you. Okay, I will call the question then. Are we, or did you have a motion? Were you? There was. Councillor Baxter moved the option A, and I'm not sure who seconded it. Who seconded it? Councillor Parkinson seconded it. Yeah. Council, are we good? Councillor Day.
I think for the motion to reflect our discussion here tonight, my understanding would be that it is without lighting. So option A, but minus the David Arm lighting. So I could move an amendment if that would be appropriate.
Yeah, it looks, just before staff, I just want to clarify, is it better as an amendment or is it better as a standalone motion?
So an amendment would be appropriate. The current motion includes the lighting. Amendment to remove it would be appropriate.
Okay, thank you. Then I'll look.
So I'd move that we remove the lighting.
Seconded by Councillor Parkinson. So we are presently on the amendment to remove the lighting. So is there any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in opposition? Nobody opposes. That becomes part of the main motion now. I will call the, I will look to any other discussion. Okay, I will call the question on the main motion. Those in opposition, which is myself, Mayor Martin opposes. Moving on to 7.4. This is, oh, your last one. Ms. Bovin, our Manager of Finance, regarding the second quarter financial update.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I'm just going to provide a little bit of context to the cover report. I just want to remind council that this is the second quarter financial update. We have projected results that represent what we anticipate to spend to the end of this year. They are preliminary and they will be further refined for the third quarter update. Operating revenues are forecasted to slightly exceed budget at this time, so 101% of budget, and that's primarily due to the federal payment in lieu of tax revenue adjustment that's being made in 2022 due to an adjustment that was made in 2021 when we expected that we were going to have to repay some of the federal payment in lieu of taxes due to prior years, and the federal government has let us know that they are not going to expect payment back from us. Core operating expenses are forecasted to come in slightly under budget at 98%. The primary reason is due to staffing transition. And I will note that the city is experiencing cost escalation due to the fuel prices. And as a result, some of our contracted services are adding a fuel surcharge to their invoices as well. So there's some impact due to that, and budgets are being monitored closely by staff. With respect to the capital program, we are seeing some increases with road infrastructure work. So as council has discussed tonight with respect to the sidewalk and bike lane program that was previously presented to council at June 13th and at the item before this one tonight. And then the other one with the Latoria VMP roundabout, and that is in part due to the complexity of the roundabout, the environmental sensitivities, and the need to realign Latoria Creek. So those are all factors that are contributing to the budget increase on that project. And finally, I just want to highlight a number. We've had a number of successful grant applications. I know we spoke tonight about one application that's still outstanding, but there's been a number, so over $5 million in successful grant applications over the last couple of years to support things such as active transportation, wayfinding, and heritage initiatives. And I wanted to give kudos, or we wanted to give kudos to the city's program coordinator, Rachel Buskey, who's been integral in applying for those grants. And so we do, as mentioned, have that large pending grant application with respect to sidewalks and bike lanes as well that I will be hoping is successful. That said, there are a number of recommendations in the report, and I'm happy to answer any questions that council may have about the recommendations or anything else in the report.
I like the leading question of quick questions. Councillor Parkinson.
Quickly, I'd just like to congratulate whoever stick handled the PILT application there. That's a big swing and much appreciated. Otherwise, I'd be ready to move the recommendation if you like, Your Worship.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Kobayashi. Councillor Day.
So my quick question is just in regards to the design of the Public Works Administration facility. $300,000 is a lot for a design. Is this design following along the lines of the report that we received for the full site reimagination?
Thank you, Worship, through to Councillor Day. The 300,000 was based on 10% of the capital cost. Capital cost was estimated at 3 million. As council is aware, we've gone through a process to establish a 50-year time frame for redevelopment of this site, and the first phase of that will be the construction of a Public Works Administration building. We've engaged the work of Collier's Project Management to help us go through the procurement process, so to determine a procurement methodology, which will include how we advance the design. And so at this juncture, we were not prepared to refine that number, but it's anticipated As we move through the procurement, staff will return to council with a refinement of our new understanding of the design costs, specifically for the Public Works Admin Building, which is the only component we're actively moving forward with design.
Okay, thank you.
I'm not seeing any other hands, so I will call the question. Those in opposition? Nobody opposes. Moving on to 7.5, this is Ms. Russell, a manager of corporate communications regarding neighborhood wayfinding implementation plan.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a brief presentation here just to run through the details of the wayfinding strategy. Thanks, Amanda. So the strategy outlines a combination of vehicle and pedestrian-oriented signage to welcome people to the city and help people navigate through the city. The goal is really to reduce visual clutter, ease navigation, encourage active transportation, and help local businesses thrive, all while creating a sense of place with clean, clear, and consistent signage. So this is just a look at the sign family that has been designed, which council saw in November when we presented the draft report. So gateway signage, neighborhood markers, primary vehicle directional signage, and then active transportation signage, both finger posts and map kiosks, as well as pageantry to enhance the designs. The plan calls for responsible, sustainable, and authentically Colwood design. So they're designed using sustainable elements that speak to Colwood's natural seaside setting and align with the design of successfully implemented park signage. Driftwood elements, durable materials, modular design for flexibility and affordability, and a considered approach to installation. Legibility and accessibility are important. Easy to understand, characters sized according to viewing distance, speed of travel, and expected viewer reaction times. And to further enhance the strategy, there's a plan for GIS, well, an app to further enhance navigation as our GIS system expands at the city. It's a way to celebrate Colwood's unique neighborhoods, identifying neighborhoods that makes it not only easier to navigate the community, but further defines sense of place, acknowledges distinguishing features, and creates a sense of belonging. Oops. The neighborhood boundaries reflect on-the-ground experience, using intuitive boundaries and logical alignment with streets, natural features, and destinations. It's a way of directing visitors to new areas of Colwood. So currently many development teams find it necessary to add additional signage at intersections in Colwood. This creates kind of a haphazard assortment of signs in Colwood. So a consistent and attractive sign strategy with modular sign panels may be added and removed as needed for new and developing neighborhoods, as you can sort of see on the right there. Marketing signage can then take over on private property to direct people to specific buildings or destinations. It's also a way to encourage active transportation. Mobility is one of council's strategic priorities, and the city's investing in enhanced active transportation networks. Finger post signs in key locations will direct people to trails and connections. Map kiosks in town center locations over time will encourage people to explore walking routes and commercial areas. It's also an opportunity to make Indigenous culture more visible in Colwood. Staff will work to engage colleagues from Songhees and Esquimalt nations to explore opportunities to incorporate Lekwungen language into some of the signage. For example, a Triangle Mountain sign may have the Lekwungen word for mountain or for view. A Royal Beach sign may have the Lekwungen term describing beach or ocean. So we'll work on that kind of addition over time. For 2022, what's proposed using the successful grant application is 2 gateway markers to welcome people to Colwood, 10 neighborhood signs. 12 neighborhoods are outlined in the plan, but because Colwood Corners has a significant amount of signage already, Royal Bay similarly has significant amount of signage, we would wait on those 2 as that signage ages out. 3 primary vehicle signs along Soup Road to begin to direct people to some of the destinations and neighborhoods, and then 3 pedestrian finger posts in key locations to enhance our active transportation routes. So as shown in your report, there's a financial consideration included. The total from the grant for this aspect of the project is $117,000. We were fortunate to receive. The total cost, including the city's portion, would be $156,000 to implement this first phase of the plan. So the budget request for tonight is $39,000 to meet that portion of the grant. So the recommendation tonight is that council direct staff to coordinate the production and installation of new signs, welcoming people and directing people throughout Colwood in the amount of $117,000, along with a matching budget contribution of $39,000. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Councillor Baxter.
Yeah, I'm really happy to see this, happy to see the detail of it. I think it's gonna help people find their way around council with Colwood, which has been a problem for visitors on bikes, especially, that I've noted. And so I move the recommendation.
Great, thank you. Can I get a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Day. Councillor Kobayashi, then Parkinson.
Thank you very much. Just a quick question. You probably have this at your fingertips here. I was a little confused because this number sort of stuck up my head when I read the financial report, because it talked about the grant, the Canada Community Revitalization Fund of 162,000. So then it was 117 here. Could you just reconcile that for me? Thank you very much.
Your worship, through to Councillor Kobayashi, you're correct. So the total value of the project, as noted in the Q2 financial update, is $216,700. Sandra's report is specific to the signage and wayfinding portion of that project, which is 156,000 total. The other 60,700 is for street furniture with respect to park benches, recycling stations, and dog stations.
Councillor Logan.
Oh, thank you, worship. So awesome. So awesome. One question, and I'm not sure if we addressed it when we talked about the design earlier, and I'm wary of having too much on a sign. So just wondering if there has been any thought to putting the degree of difficulty or the accessibility factor on some of these signs, because it would sure suck a family or somebody in a chair or whatever going to the Tory Creek Park only to go, crap, there's stairs. You know what I mean?
Yes, thank you for that question. And that we've discussed in terms of park signage. So adding something like you might see on a ski hill, black diamond, blue square, green circle, to indicate that level of difficulty. In some cases, we've included on park signage actually steep sections, so we will definitely do that. In addition, on the finger post signs, we've talked about having distances to specify that. So over time, we'll really build out that network in cooperation with the Active Transportation Network Plan. Thank you.
Councillor Day.
Thank you. Just on that point, the user-friendly trail kit has signage recommendations, which would give you both elevation, degree of difficulty, and it would be a really great to see that format duplicated, because we are working again to try to reestablish our ties with the CRD, who is our partner in the user-friendly trail guide. So if we were able to get the city on board with that signage and also the CRD on board with that signage, it would go a long way to helping people throughout the region and who may visit Colwood.
Thank you for that. We'll reference that and incorporate it.
So the only question I have for you is in regards to the one slide around development, and that we would start. Have we had that discussion with the development community at all? And the reason I worry, I like it. I think it's the right way to go, but I worry that we're going to get pushback from our development community going, I have a certain brand that I'm trying to advertise and trying to get people to buy that product, and I don't have that now because you guys have taken that away from me. So I'm just curious if we've thought about that, or I'll look for comment.
Thank you. We have thought about that. There may be some pushback. We have our first meeting actually with one of our development teams tomorrow to talk about this plan, assuming it moves forward. And we'll have to work our way through those things. But the idea is really that the marketing takes place on their private property. We get people there and they take over.
Right.
That's the plan, and we'll see
Okay.
how it's received. Thank you.
Okay, great. I don't see any other hands. We do already have the motion, so I'll call the question. Those in opposition? Nobody opposes. Moving on to 7.6. This is Ms. Hernandez, our Manager of Development Services, regarding the community amenity contribution negotiation update for RZ 21011-3601 Olympian Way and 620 Middlesex Avenue.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have a brief presentation, just a brief summary of what these two applications were. It was first received and reviewed by Committee of the Whole on March 7th, and subsequently the recommendation from Committee of the Whole discussed by Council on March 14 earlier this year. And if you recall, it was two apartment buildings, one located at 3601 Olympian Way, that would be 90 apartment units. It's a 7-story building. And then another proposal right across the street from Olympian Way, access off of Medalist Avenue at 620 Medalist, and that's a proposed 5-story apartment building for 34 units. And these are just the proposed concept plans where we've discussed that the conservation area and the environmental concerns were captured under an environmental development permit that was part of the subdivision that created the parcels back in 2017 and amended in 2019 to incorporate the specific protection to trees and open green space that is shown in the concept plans. These are some of the renderings that were provided, generally speaking to the massing, the height, and how the buildings will be kind of located or propped on the existing rock outcrop. And that is a prominent feature on these corners. Based on the discussion and review of the proposal by Council back in March 14, staff were given direction to look at the community amenity contribution, the interim amenity contribution, and come back with to address concerns of Council about the legal framework of how that policy was developed. And we brought forward a report last Council meeting in June 27th. We had that report forward for information. And tonight we're just focusing, bringing forward the revised proposal for CAC contribution that the applicant is putting forward for your consideration. So initially, the applicant's package for community amenity contribution was a request that he abides by the community amenity contributions that were negotiated back in 2002 as part of the CD2 zone. The two proposals that are being brought forward for you tonight are proposal number A, which is abiding by the $1,819 per unit with an additional contribution of $500 per unit for the affordable housing fund and an additional $525 per unit for the fire hall fund. The developer is also proposing to contribute towards the installation and procurement of public art at the interface between these proposed buildings and the Veterans Memorial Parkway La Toria intersection for a combined value of up to $150,000. That would be proposal A, assuming that the density that is approved for these two buildings does not increase the total permitted number of units that are contemplated under the official community plan for Olympic View, which is a total of 456 units. The proposal B is a request from the applicant that if the new interim community amenity contribution rates are applied, that council consider the additional units above and beyond the 456 units currently set as the maximum number of residential dwelling units in Olympic View. And so provided that council agrees to increase the maximum permitted number of residential units in Olympic View, the applicant has agreed to pay the amenity contributions once the number of units exceeds that threshold of 4. So he would pay the existing CD2 zone rates for the 456 units, and then any units that exceed that 456 threshold would be charged the community amenity contributions as per the community amenity interim policy. And so the financial implications as to what would these mean in terms of if we were to apply proposal A, or if we were to look at proposal B, that's generally the estimated contribution if we were to apply it to the 124 units that we are contemplating tonight, 90 apartment units plus 34 apartment units. There are a number of options for you to consider tonight, and they are basically whether council supports proposal number 8, so not changing the overall density of Olympic View at this point in time. Proposal number B, which would be an expectation that council is ready to increase the overall density of Olympic View. Option number 3 is that there is a further negotiation that takes place either here with the applicant or staff be directed to continue to negotiate. And then option 4, to defer the application for any additional information that may be necessary. And option 5, to deny the application. So that's all for me. And I'm here to answer any questions. The applicant's representative is also in attendance if you would like to ask any questions directly to him.
Great, thank you. Councillor Day, then Kobayashi.
Hi, so with the increased numbers of units, is that only adding 1 story? I see 7 stories in the report, and it was 6 stories, I believe, before.
So for the increased density, we would still need to create. So I guess the increased overall density for Olympic View would need to be amending the official community plan, the local area plan, and then it would need an amendment to the CD2 zone. So for the CD2 zone, we're creating an area 5 within that CD2 zone that would increase the maximum permitted height on these 2 particular pieces of land up to 7 stories. So it is, so the height a restriction would come under the land use bylaw, and then the density would be reflected both in the official community plan and as a cap in the CD2 zone, that the overall number does not exceed that 580 unit.
So maybe help me with my memory then. Are we here because they didn't want to pay the updated contribution rates?
Yes, I think we are here because community amenity contributions are a negotiation with an applicant. And in this particular case, the expectation from council was to start implementing that interim community amenity contribution on any new applications. However, the case of a master plan community where the overall number of units is approved, potentially years back, 20 years back, they were given a certain number of units, and up until today, they have only built, give or take, 30, 20 some of those 456 units that were granted or considered back in 2002. So it's, I guess, a point of conversation for how to implement community amenity contributions on a master plan community where there was already an entitlement to a density, a number of density, and whether asking to place apartments in certain parcels is just merely redistributing that allocation of density, or if we want to implement new charges, should that increase the allocation or the permitted number of units. So I guess it's a request to consider either.
Okay, so the request, we've set our community contribution rates, and now suddenly we're at amending our OCP.
So these applications from the beginning, from the very initial state, they involve an OCP amendment because the local area plan for Olympic View would need to change. These two parcels currently only allow townhomes to be constructed on them. So in order to enable apartment buildings, these two parcels will need to be color coded for apartments in the local area plan that is part of the OCP. So from the beginning, it was an OCP amendment, but I think now the OCP amendment ask could potentially include, if council were to support it, an increase to the overall number of units, in addition to changing the color of the map.
Okay, so I find it difficult to accept that this is a master planned community where the plans are changing, but somehow, they don't want to pay today's rates for today's plan. So I will leave it to hear other people's questions.
Councillor Kobayashi.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. So I just want to make sure I'm clear on this. This has this extra 124 units of density that they want. That's in the overall area. It's not the 7 and the 5-story building that we've already talked about already, because that, there are 90 units and 34 units, which just happen to be 124. So that, I guess I just want to make sure I'm clear. We're not adding more stories to the 7-story and the 5-story that we've already discussed. That, I think that was actually Councillor Day's question here, just to clarify that.
Okay, so I understand the question better now. So no, we're not. So the application is just as it was presented back in March. It is a 7-story and a 5-story. It's just that initially those properties were only developable as townhome sites. So the allocation, the maximum allocation on those sites would have been far less than, let's say, 90 units or 34. And so in rezoning them, they are asking for that either, and you could consider it either as floating the density that they've already been granted back in 2002, kind of taking some density from other areas and locating it at the corner to support that neighborhood center. Or the proposal for the CAC, it relates to that they are prepared to pay the interim rates for contribution as long as the increase of density is applied to the overall Olympic View site.
Okay, so have you got schematics on what they want to do in that area then, like with the increased density? Or are we doing this blind? We're just gonna rezone blind here? Is that what you're asking us to do here?
Yeah, that's probably a good question for the applicant. We do know that there is an intent for them to come forward with an overall amendment to the master plan that would better identify how and where would they locate the additional density.
Peter, did you want to come on live and speak to it, or do you want to have the person in the room speak to it? I'm going to think he wants you to speak to it.
Oh, there he is.
Oh, there you
No,
go.
no, I'm here. I'm trying to unmute myself. Sorry, I'm in Europe right now, so it's like 4:30 in the morning. Look, we've been asked to change a lot of things in our plans with staff and with Colwood. I think we're simply trying to, the new CACs came up on us a month before we were supposed to have first reading here. They were not part of our financial plan for these units, and we just didn't think it was a fair way to approach us. We were never approached about the CACs beforehand, so we've proposed this and an alternative to that. I think what we've proposed is in line with what the CACs are for South Latoria, which we think is a fair comparison for us to be looking at for community contributions. And I think that we've been and are contributing to the community in other ways, most recently with the intersection that's being built at Latoria and VMP. So we're not increasing the size of these buildings. They are always 4 and 6 stories. The 7 stories comes from this 1 story of underground parking or 2 stories of underground parking. And the way that the height is calculated based on the gradient of the site. So they are a 6-story building of living space, 2 stories of underground parking on lot 35.
Okay, fair enough. That's thank you, Peter. It's just that I have no idea what's going to happen now. I guess it's hard to sit here and make a decision on when you don't know what the plan is here. I guess my other question on
pardon me to interrupt, but we've tried to include our updated master plan in the 2008 OCP, and it wasn't accepted as an area plan at the time in that OCP. So I kind of find it hard to accept that we haven't been forthright with Colwood or with our plans. I think we've shown our master plan, which is an outline of the design for Olympic View, for quite a few years now. So,
well, I'm not arguing that, Peter, at all. So I just that I have no idea. I know you're asking for 124 more units in density. I wouldn't argue it if I sort of had an understanding of what it's going to look like and what the plan is. So I'm not arguing anything that you're saying here whatsoever. It's just that I don't have an understanding of this, and and it's difficult to sit here and make a decision when I don't know. And I guess the other things, I guess this comes later on as far as making sure all the appropriate reports that have to be done, amendments to traffic studies, et cetera, are all done. But yeah, I guess that's what my question was, is that I was hoping that we had a better understanding of what you plan to do there. And, you know, it's hard. I'm basically feeling I'm blind. Maybe the other counselors feel comfortable with this. But it's flying blind because, like I said, I have no idea what your plan is. If you're adding, you know, the density someplace else and how you're doing this, I have no idea. So that's all I have to say.
Maybe I can clarify
Okay,
for everybody. You know, we've put out two options here. One is that if you want us to pay the new CACs, which came up to us as a surprise before our first reading of this particular item, then, you know, we're saying, okay, call it new density. You've always been calling this just, you know, like, we think this is new density because we're putting it at the front of the development at the intersection where it's more appropriate to put development and more density at a major intersection. You know, if you're not calling it new density, then it's coming out of the 456 units that are already entitled for Olympic View, and that's fine too. But we have an issue with having to pay, you know, this extended CSE contributions when we're already doing these things, and we've put an alternative in there to provide public art as an alternative. So, and to bring us in more in line with what Royal Bay and other master plan developers are paying for CACs.
thank you.
Excuse me, Councillor Parkinson, then Logan.
Thank you, Worship. I struggle with this one a lot. As I said before, I like the buildings. I think they're appropriate. I think they're nice looking buildings. Few questions. Yasmin, it sounded to me like you had suggested that if we took the option B, the first 456 units, whatever they may be, would pay the lower rates and the higher rates would be on the difference after 456 was built. Is that how it would work?
I believe that is the proposal that the applicant has put forward. So if it's new density, he still has 456 units that he could build within the current rates. And then it's only when he crosses that threshold that then the additional units would be charged the new amenity rates. And but maybe Peter can correct me if that's misrepresenting, but I believe that is his proposal.
This is just the same way that we're being treated in our other municipality that we're in Langford. This is exactly, you know, the CACs are on title at Olympic View, like they are written into the covenant on title of the properties. So that's why we were never approached about changing those CACs, you know, and it was written in a way that, you know, until you had first reading, these are the new CACs. We were in process since last October, I think, on these two. So
essentially this would just predetermine the CACs for units from 456 to 580 on the site, which is exactly what's got us into this trouble here today. You know, we predetermined CACs 20 years ago. I'm sure nobody at the time thought it was going to be 20 years before anything was built. So that's part of the problem. Perhaps clarify for me, Yasmin. I'm hearing these are what Olympic View has on title for the first whatever number of units it is comparable to what Royal Bay and is that the same as what they're paying, or do we know? I mean, I agree that we have a lot of CACs out there that were frankly as out to date as the zoning at Olympic View. So
off the top of my head, I'm not I can recite the CD 28 and CD 31 community amenity contribution package. I do believe the ones negotiated for Olympic View are slightly lower. Even assuming that the ones that we implemented with the CD 28 and the CD 31 for Royal Beach and Royal Bay, Latoria South, those would likely reflected the prior community amenity contributions, which did have, like, it was slightly higher, $2,000, I believe, per unit. So not tremendously greater amount. So relatively on par.
As far as the public art is concerned, is there a process for picking that? Is that, you know, a statue of Peter in the middle of the intersection, or is there some process that?
I can assure you it's not going to be a statue of me in the intersection.
Who chooses the art? How do we try to make sure it's compatible with what, frankly, art we'd like to do in the future in Colwood, and how do we manage that process if that's the route council decides to take?
Yes, so the community planning department is preparing a public art policy and guidelines to guide the contributions. And I think council earlier this year created that public art fund that was supposed to be allocated cash contributions from developer to go towards that fund. And with the intent that in the future, Colwood would develop a set of guidelines and parameters, and then council would have the decision ultimately as to the location for these art installations, or have some level of input into location, type of art, artists, etc. It's in infancy, I would say. That the fund has been created, and there is work being done to develop that policy framework around public art. And I guess the applicant is suggesting that he will lead in the procurement and identify the location.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to encourage council to talk a lot on this one because I really haven't made up my mind yet. Thank you.
Councillor Logan.
Thank you, Your Worship. Like Councillor Parkinson, I'm struggling a bit with this, and he actually asked the question I wanted to ask too, and I think it's a very important point to make, that the new CA or proposed CACs would only apply on the additional 124 units of density. And I don't think I was naive enough to think that we wouldn't see some sort of application change to request additional density as a result of consolidating some density on this corner. Yeah, I could see the writing on the wall that was coming anyways. So, you know, the offer really, it's like, it rings a bit hollow for me, I suppose, because it was going to come anyway, the option B part. So I guess what I'm struggling with is this is not a simple boundary change, moving a road here, but it's consolidating some density with an impact on some neighbors, and there's some value in there for the developer. And I guess what I'm saying is there ought to be some value for the municipality as well. And I'm not seeing that recognition. So, and I'm not saying, you know, I realize this is a negotiation, and I'm not saying, you know, the full rate perhaps is warranted, but I haven't seen any movement. And that's what I'm struggling with, is to recognize, for the municipality to recognize the value in the change, because there's some effort, realizing down the road there will be a rezoning to add some additional density on that site as a result of the consolidation. So, you know, like Councillor Parkinson, I'm struggling. I haven't made up my mind yet, but again, yeah, I need to see the value for the municipality. And given, you know, as pointed out, that those rules were 20 years old. We're in new times, different expectations as well from our residents. So I think that too needs to be recognized. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Councillor Baxter.
I'm struggling to understand what we're doing here. So if I look at option 2, it says that appropriate amendments to section 31.2 of the official community plan bylaw be prepared. So I've never seen a official community plan change be done by resolution like this.
So I guess we're asking that we prepare amending bylaws to be brought forward for consideration. So at this point, we have had this application, as Peter mentioned, since October of last year. And it came forward for an introduction in March of this year, but we never moved towards preparing any bylaw or it hasn't gotten off to a start. So I guess we need guidance from council, whether if you are supportive of this application, then we need to go ahead and start preparing those amending bylaws and then set off on the process of a public hearing and kind of the OCP amendment and rezoning process. So it's not to say that we are amending the OCP by resolution, it's that it will set the process in motion. It would give us a go point if you are supportive of either of these proposals. If you are not ready there, if you're not quite there yet, we have other options to continue to negotiate, to request more information, to deny the application, I suppose. So the options are just whether if you feel supportive of this application and whichever iteration or proposal, the next step would be for us to work on an amending bylaw and bring it forward for further more consideration and conversation and an invitation to the public to come and speak to council.
And part of that discussion would normally be things like what will the CACs be?
Yes, because the CACs, unlike what I hear in the Langford side, so we don't embed it into a legal agreement on title. The CACs become part of the amending bylaw. So it would become part of that CD2 zone that would then have a structure that imposes a different rate once you pass a certain threshold of units, or that embeds that our contribution expectation. So we would work with either resolution to bring forward an amending bylaw that clarifies that ask.
So at what step in the process will we find out what the developer proposes to do with the additional units?
So I think in absence of a change to the local area plan that lives in the official community plan, we would just be left to assume that the land use pattern in Olympic View will remain as per the OCP, with only these two sites changing to apartments. And then the additional multifamily dwellings in Olympic View as it currently stands, I believe are concentrated around that village or like neighborhood village that is closer south towards the clubhouse area. And the land use designation has areas that are designated for single family townhomes and then the apartment section. So one could only infer that the 580 units would need to be distributed based on that land use expectation. Until they come forward for an OCP amendment that changes the map. The land use map itself wouldn't change for the rest of the site, not yet.
So what you're saying is that the map in the OCP wouldn't necessarily change, but the total number of units allowed over that entire area would change. And then it would be up to the developer to come forward with specific development proposals that met the new limit and all the other associated limits, setbacks, heights, etc., that were already in the bylaws.
Yes, that's correct.
In which case I move option 2.
Okay, I will look for a seconder. We do not have a seconder, so we'll continue. I'm going to insert myself next because Councillor Day, you have already spoken once on this. But yeah, so I'm going to insert myself now, and then I'll come to you. Just like everybody else at the table, I struggled with this. I did a significant amount of reading, trying to figure out this. I also had significant conversations with 3 other mayors and about this situation. This situation seems to me to boil down to this. The density that's already approved on specific areas, are they entitled, is a developer entitled to pay the CAC on that density no matter what? And then if they ever ask for any new density, they should be paying the new CACs. Or anytime you look for a change, should the new CAC apply? I was initially with the philosophy that if you're looking for a change, then that change should trigger a new CAC charge, and that's just it. And this has a significant consequence, I think, tonight, this decision, because it also reflects to, we know Royal Beach is going to be coming forward to look at a rezone, but they're only moving roads. They're not adding any new density. So are we going to look at charging them CACs on that entire development because they've moved the roads? Or do they get to keep the density volume that they already have and pay the old CACs on that? It's going to happen at Royal Bay as well. I expect that Royal Bay is going to come back and they're going to say, we would like some additional density, but the density we have presently, we should be paying the CAC charge on, or the old CAC charge. In discussions with my colleagues, to a person, they all reflected back to me that in their opinions, they think that the developer, it belongs, that old CAC charge belongs to them, and that it's the responsibility of the municipality to continue to reflect that. I struggle with it because the old CAC charge means that the new resident coming into this community will not benefit the same way that if they were charged the new CAC, because there's not the same level of amenity that is built. Saying all that, I believe, and I think I've come to the conclusion in reading Ms. Hernandez's report from our last committee or council meeting, is that the old CAC charges do belong to those properties. And so I think the initial option 1 for this evening, which is only entitles them for the old CACs on the initial volume, is fair. And so I would be supporting that. However, one of the discussions I had with our CAO was the CAC should be about trying to motivate our developers to actually build as well. And, you know, and the part of the reason we're in this position is exactly what Councillor Parkinson talked about, that this has been on the books 20 years. And so what happens is you're paying a CAC charge from 20 years ago versus today. And so something as simple as building in an inflation rate into the CAC charge that, you know, if you don't build it, then that CAC charge continues to grow based on the cost of inflation, or whatever that mechanism is that this council chooses. Don't know if it's legal, don't know if it's possible, but I would love for us to look at that moving forward. But unfortunately, I think we're in a position today that we need to support our developers and be really consistent and be clear with them you know, if you have that volume and you're not asking for new density, then you're entitled to that old CAC charge. So it took me a long time to get there, but that's where I'm resonating right now. Councillor Day.
Thank you. I would like to move that we get more information. And my reasoning is this, that there isn't a single chair around the table here where we haven't struggled tonight. Either, you know, maybe you weren't here for the history, there's a long history here, or, you know, I also heard the proponents saying that they wanted to be included in the official community plan. My recollection, and it's only my recollection, is that we were already too far along in our public process with our OCP to add something new in at that time that it was ready. So let's put all the eggs together in our basket and find a way to work with our developer, respecting also the community who has wishes. And if we're going to hang on to our community contribution levels from 20 years ago, we're not going to be able to do very much for affordable housing or art or any of the other things that we try to do with our amenity contributions. So I really, I don't think that that's helpful. So and one of the concerns that I do have is that if we approve the plan that, you know, they have the old rates on the 456 and then the additional units are at the new rate, isn't that a disincentive to the additional density anyways? But I don't really think that houses are built or not built based on things that are less than $5,000 in cost. I just don't. In the world that we're in, it's whether your community is ready and whether the house that's being built meets the needs of the people who will pay the money to live there. So I'm going to move that we defer this and get more information, including how the proposal impacts a potential change to the official community plan, what they wanted to include for us to understand how they're going to use the density that they're talking about and work towards making an informed decision.
Do I have a seconder for the deferral? Seconded by, I'll give the Councillor Kobayashi. No discussion on deferral. Sorry, Councillor Parkinson. Those in yeah. Well, hold on. So can I get another clarification? Because I was told at CRD that actual deferrals can be discussed. Is it accurate? Is it not accurate? I just want to confirm from a Robert's Rules standpoint.
It's in the community charter.
Or in the community charter. It's just that the CRD has a different opinion than this table.
No.
I'm sorry, a deferral can't interrupt the motion that's on the table, but can the deferral be discussed? Or is it limited to the time and place is the only discussion? It is. Well, we're on a deferral. I'm just trying to see if I can have you speak to it. No, there isn't an. No, Councillor Baxter moved option 2, and there wasn't a seconder, so that there was no motion. And then the first motion that I have that got a seconder was Councillor Day's deferral. So, sorry, speaking. I'll have you speak into the mic.
My understanding that Councillor Day moved one of the 5 options that we were given by our staff.
Yes. Which is a deferral. And I was just trying to figure out if
okay.
You can speak to the deferral. That doesn't sound like it. So I'll call the question on the deferral. Those in opposition, Counselor Parkinson, Mayor Martin, that motion passes. Moving on to 7.7. This is Ms. Lockhart, our technical supervisor, engineering regarding 807 Bexell Road.
Thank you, Your Worship. This report is to update council on progress towards obtaining 807 Bexhill Road and to seek approval for further actions. We're in the process of negotiating an amendment for a sanitary statutory right-of-way with Fulton Road owners. We have determined that the sanitary sewers are in good overall condition and the Qualta lift station can handle the sewer flows for all of the Bexhill Strata residents. The designs and tender package for the sewer connections are close to ready to go out to tender. Cost estimates were revised for more current pricing and due to the detailed designs. There are 2 bylaws on this agenda to enlarge the main and west local area services for the 30 Bexhill Strata properties for first 3 readings. There are several recommendations for council to consider. The recommendation to increase the 2022 budget was passed in item 7.4 earlier this meeting. Thank you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Counselor Parkinson.
Thank you, Ms. Lockhart. Looks like you've done a lot of work on this. My concern is that we seem to be landlocked, if you like, by these 3 existing homes on Fulton Drive who have yet to agree on sanitary sewer being added to their statutory right-of-way documents. That's correct, isn't it?
That's correct, but there is the lift station that can pump the sewage towards the Sewell Road connection. Like that's how it's done now. There's a lift station for this for the sewage to go to the 807 on-site septic system right now. So we can go on indefinitely with that lift station, although it's preferable to service by gravity, of course.
So just the going on indefinitely with the lift station, has that option been approved by the strata councils? Could we just proceed to do that and not do Fulton Road?
Can we, sorry?
You mentioned that I guess if we can't get signatures on the Fulton Road from the Fulton Road properties, that the lift station and the force main could continue to be used by the strata council. And is that an option that's been approved and ready to go? Is it because the strata council signed off on that?
We were thinking that the city would take over the lift station and its operation, and we would have an agreement with the strata council for that. Right now, it's on a common property owned by the stratas. So unless that got converted to road dedication, then we would need an agreement with the stratas, and they would be open. Like they would like the sewer connection, the municipal connection, even if it has to be with the lift station.
I'm sure they would, but perhaps the preferable situation would be for the strata to continue to own the lift station and the force main. Has that been discussed with them, or could we count on that being an option?
No, we talked with them, and they expect that the city would take over all of the municipal infrastructure, including the lift station. That's what we've been discussing with them.
Okay, so the first option would be to eliminate the lift station and get the Fulton Road signatures. But until we get those, we really can't proceed because we don't know when we can't sort of build the sewer and then be held to ransom by some property owners who, for whatever reason, decide not to legitimize the existing sewer running through their right of way. So I would think I'm correct on that. And then secondly, then if it was the case that we didn't have the signatures and therefore didn't build the Fulton Road situation, the other choice, the other decision to be made is, does the lift station remain a strata lift station and a force main for the strata, or should the city take it over? And one suspects in history that most strata lift stations perhaps have less maintenance and less looking after than a City of Colwood lift station does. And then, they may, that may be less expensive for them to own it and maintain it rather than the city. So is that correct to sort of make those assumptions?
Well, through your worship, the lift station pumps sewage for, there's 12 lots, and actually I only think 11 are built on. So, yeah, if we don't get the Fulton Road signatures, yeah, it's an option, but looking at the agreements that were made in the past, it looked as though the city would take over all of the sewage infrastructure within the road right of ways and the stat right of ways. So, yeah.
So I guess the first decision point has to be is can we get those signatures on Fulton Road, and then what kind of timeline should we set to, because I don't personally see how we proceed without knowing that answer. Do we have any thoughts on what would be a reasonable timeline to set? And if they're not going to happen, then we have to go a different route.
Yeah, John, I don't know if you would like to answer that.
Yeah.
I see you standing.
Thank you, Helen, your worship, through to Council Parkinson. Staff has started this or run down the path of working with the strata with the assumption that we would take over all the infrastructure at some point. We did not anticipate the difficulty we'd have with the 3 homeowners. And it hasn't been with a negotiation, it's been with a contact. The first person that we've actually been able to contact and have a discussion with has said yes to the SRW. The other 2 we actually haven't had a conversation with yet. And as easy as social media is today, we're doing this through mail. So Canada Post is indeed still needed. So we've sent them, and the one homeowner has basically said, I'll contact you when I'm ready. So we're probably going to up that game and knock on the door and see if we can actually start a conversation, because they haven't been that forthcoming with regards to a conversation. And I think it's mostly been because they just spent $30,000 on a septic field. So they feel like there's no need for them to say yes to our request. But they haven't had the conversation about the value it does add to their property. So we're fairly confident if we have the conversation that they can be persuaded.
So how much time should we suggest?
I would like to think that if I had to, I could have somebody watch the door when they show up. But if you gave us 60 days, I think we can at least find out if we can get all 3 SRWs in place. And if you're thinking about timing and next steps, regardless of where we get to, if we are going to move forward, the piece from Sewell Close makes sense to do now. And then if we're not sure about getting the right of way, we can do the Fulton piece sometime in the future, depending on whether we get the SRW or not. And then it comes down to the question of, do you want to maintain that on the city's behalf and negotiate that? Or do you want to let the property or the strata continue to own it? My suggestion would be, if you felt like you did not want to take on that uncertainty of, as you say, a lift station that likely hasn't been maintained to our standards, that we include those thoughts into that negotiation. I realize for myself anyways, I'm stepping into this process many years after it's been started, so I don't want to say too much with regards to where negotiations would go, but I certainly understand that lift station probably hasn't been to our standards and it's significantly under-maintained would be my guess, and not through any reason other than the strata owners just wouldn't know how to do it, so they'd be at the mercy of a contractor at the time.
Yeah. Okay, I'll let others speak.
Councillor Baxter?
Yeah, I'm concerned about the idea of proceeding with any construction that in the end requires the Fulton Road rights of way. Colwood has a bit of a history of doing things like that. And I know when I came to work in Colwood, I inherited a great deal of very large pipe sitting on the Allendale Road right of way, because it had been assumed that a right of way would be provided. The pipe had been bought, and then the right of way never became available. So I don't want to go there until that's done. And in 1B of options alternatives, page 3 of the report, it says council may require the Stratus to perform the decommissioning subject to staff review, or council may direct that this is a city obligation. What is it legally? Is it a city obligation, or is it a obligation of the Strata?
I don't know from a legal perspective with regards to any documents have been signed. But from a negotiated outcome, it could go either way. That would be at the direction of council.
So we don't really have a basis on which to make that decision.
I think your basis comes down to, again, that negotiated outcome of the value of what you see you're receiving for the value of what you're giving.
And I think there's no question the value of what we're receiving far exceeds what we might be giving. The difficulty is that it seems like we've been brought an incomplete negotiation. And it's very difficult for us to know, to make that decision, because it feels like we'd be interfering with the negotiation. Again, in 1E, it says it would be at council's discretion to waive applicable sewer connection fees. But I don't feel like I've been given a reason to waive them, or the weight that that might carry in negotiations. I mean, I quite understand if I was part of the Strata, I would like to have as many fees and costs as possible transferred to the city. I understand that, and we don't want to be ungenerous, but on the other hand, I don't feel like I understand how this all plays in to a final product, particularly given that the negotiation on the stat right-of-ways is only partially begun, let alone completed. So in the June 7th, 2021 report, there was a recommendation, which I think was adopted. And I would have to say that the second paragraph, that piece is not complete. The fourth paragraph is partially done, but also ongoing. And so I don't see a basis on which I can firmly build my decisions on this. And I certainly don't want to proceed with any construction that assumes that we will get a right of way. So that's where I stand on this. Thank you.
Not seeing any other hands. Councillor Parkinson.
Okay, you want me to go again? Because this probably falls into Michael's and I bailiwick more than the rest. So we should take some time, and then 60 days sounds good, to see if Fulton Road is in or out, essentially. I mean, if we get the signatures, good, but we can't be dilly-dallying around forever. I believe that that would then, if we can't get if we get the signatures, everything's fine. We're all down the path that's been laid out. if we can't get the signatures, then we go back to constructing the Sewell Road connection, if I understand it correctly. And that'll take all the sewage, but it'll take sewage from the lift station and the force main as well as gravity sewage. Have I got that correct?
Correct.
And then there's the question of should that force main and lift station be city owned and maintained or strata owned and maintained? And right now it's strata owned and maintained. And I guess my preference would be to leave it that way. So to move this forward, I would be prepared to move the recommendation that it be recommended to council 807 Bexell Road be purchased for $1 to complete the option to purchase agreement. And the sewer connection enhancement fees for each lot in strata BIS 2419 and BIS 2420 be waived. And this stuff about increasing the budget, we've already done that, so that's good. But then I would insert a clause, and I'll be as slow as I can here, Amanda. And that if Fulton Road signatures are not received by September 30th, works proceed on the Sewell Road connection and the sewage lift station and force main remain in operation by the strata. Sorry, I got it here. So I think that essentially gives a path to complete this works with perhaps, I don't know that I guess we'd have to make sure that the strata wasn't for some reason going to balk at the lack of a connection to Fulton. That probably needs to be confirmed. They may balk about the lift station and force main. And so they may want to come and talk to us, but I think that's a better approach than just to have the city take it over.
Okay, thank you. So I do have a motion with that additional clause. Do I have a seconder to that motion? Councillor Baxter seconded it. Okay, so I will go to Mr. Rosenberg and then.
Thank you, Your Worship. I suggest that, to my fault, I would say that I had thought that we had figured out our negotiated outcome for this. And I was bringing forward a status for an update. What I'm hearing is there's a couple of things that still need to be decided, such as whether we'd waive fees or not, who would own the lift station, the force main in the interim if we can't get the 3 SRWs. So I'm certainly happy to get the 3 SRWs outcome and figure out if we can get those or not. While we're doing that, it might be prudent to perhaps have an additional meeting in camera to discuss the negotiation tactic that staff should use for the remaining pieces that need to be done. And knowing that information, we then can go forward with regards to what that negotiated outcome looks like if we get the 3 SRWs. Because then I'll have a better feeling for what we value, what we're being given, for what we value, for what we're giving with regards to a final outcome. Because back to Councillor Baxter's point about the value of waiving the fees and some of those other things, it probably is prudent to know that as well, as if we end up deciding that we haven't got the 3 SRWs, but we're still willing to move forward, what's the cost of ongoing maintenance of that lift station and perhaps getting a better handle with our crew on what we think the long-term outcome is for that lift station, because we could be looking at something that could be expensive in the future. So that might be something we want to investigate as well within that 60 days if we think we need to go in that direction. So we can come back in the fall and give council some more information.
Great. So just as a clarification, the motion that's on the table presently, you feel that you can work with that motion and then report back to council within, and it sounds like it probably will land in camera.
Correct. I certainly have some direction to work with at this point to go there.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go to Mr. Earl before I go to Councillor Day.
Thank you, Your Worship. Council may want to defer items 8.4 and 8.5 on the agenda until such time we have greater clarity on this issue.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Councillor Day.
Thank you. Sorry, I was having great difficulty hearing, so I'm not too clear on what the motion was that Councillor Parkinson moved.
Yeah, please. Oh, I'm sorry.
Essentially, It's the recommendation in the report from Ms. Lockhart, except after the third bullet, the one that says, and further that council approves the budget. Then I had suggested that we add a clause that said, and that if Fulton Road signatures are not received by September 30th, works proceed on the Sewell Road connection and the lift station and force main remain in operation by the strata.
Thank you. Councillor Baxter.
I'd just like to ask Councillor Parkinson whether it is his understanding that if the signatures are not received within that 60 days, that the construction around that leads up to or leads from that stat right of way would not proceed.
That would be my understanding, correct? And perhaps the motion could be tidied up a little bit. We may, in fact, when I read the motion again, I'm wondering if I shouldn't add something subject to approval by the Stratus. So we don't want to build the Sewell Road connection and find, let's make sure they're on side. If I may, can I make that a friendly amendment for myself? Yeah, thank you.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands. So I'm gonna, is everybody comfortable with the motion? Okay, I will call the question. Those in opposition? Nobody opposes. Thank you. Moving on to bylaws. Bylaw number 8.1. This is bylaw number 1921, 2353, 2361 Suk Road. This is first, second, and third reading. Make it a mover and seconder, please. Moved by Councillor Baxter, second by Councillor Kobayashi. Discussion. Councillor Parkinson on discussion.
Sorry. We did get one letter concerned about the side yard setback. I wonder if Ms. Hernandez could sort of tell us where we're at on the side yard setback versus other similar situations in the city.
Through the chair to Councillor Parkinson. So currently the car wash building sits about 0.6 meters away from property line. So it's not a zero lot setback, but in terms to reflected in a land use bylaw, it's a minimum number. So we give it a 0 to establish that, but the site plan provided and seen by council does establish a 0.6 meter setback from the property line. It is unusual in the city of Colwood to have a 0 meter setback. I think we've had the luxury of having very large lots. Generally speaking, all the mixed use employment center and the industrial lots that we have in Colwood are potentially blessed with vastness of land and not necessarily the challenges that we have with these two sites that are encumbered with a BC Hydro statutory right of way and have these somewhat awkward shapes. So if we were to apply setbacks that are similar to the mixed use employment center that require a 10 meter setback and 6 to 4.5 meter side yard setbacks, then the buildable area in some of these awkward lots becomes further reduced. So there is direction within the official community plan for council and staff to consider a reduction to setbacks to enable, to recognize irregularly sized and irregularly shaped lots. So that's why the consideration of that comprehensive development zone is it's a one of its kind built to suit a proposal on a somewhat awkward lot with some challenges in terms of locating a buildable area.
And so 0.6 isn't much, but we're confident we'll get 0.6. We won't have adjustments to take it to actual 0. Is that like you've got the documentation is such that it's for sure going to be 0.6?
I have some level of confidence that in order to assemble and in order to accommodate the sound deafening and the attenuations that were proposed by the applicant on that property line, that there will need to be at least the minimum 0.6 distance from the property line. So there would be at least that.
Thank you.
Excuse me, I'm not seeing any of the hands. I'll call the question. Those in opposition? Nobody opposes. Moving on to 8.2, bylaw number 1946, 1752 Island Highway, first, second, and third reading. Moved by Councillor Logan, second by Councillor Kobayashi. Discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in opposition? Nobody opposes. Moving on to 8.3, bylaw number 1947, land use bylaw amendment CD 28. Oh, that's the one I removed, and then 8.4 and 8.5 been removed. So motion to adjourn. Thank you, Councillor Logan. Those in opposition? Nobody.